No? Sure, you can hear us? Okay.
Okay, good. Thank you very much for solving that. So I think we'll move on to the next presentation. So maybe some help with this. Okay. So thank you very much, Tarek. And now we will present the Anthropolis Research Program joined with Jakob. Maybe if you can come here. Jakob Püchinger and myself, Flore Vallet. So who are we? Jakob, I'll let you speak first.
So I was the shareholder of the Anthropolis chair until 3 weeks ago. And now I'm professor at EM Normandie, and I stay scientific advisor with Anthropolis until the end of the chair project in September next year. And I'm very happy that Flore took over the responsibility for the chair, and I'm also very grateful for her work on the chair in the last years. So I'm very happy that she's now in charge.
Thank you very much, Jakob. So myself, I'm a researcher in user-centered design at IRT System X and Centrale Supélec. And thank you also, Jakob, for this great collaboration since 2016. So I'm now very pleased to be the chairholder of this great chair, started from September and for the next months. So now we are going quickly to present our main research activities, our collaborations, just a quick overview of our publications, and we will introduce the colloquium agenda. So our main research activities, you can find the main topics here, and our industrial partners on the top: EDF, ENGIE, Renault, Communauté d'agglomération Paris-Saclay, and Nokia Bell Labs. So thank you for their support. And so the topics we are going to investigate are related to mobility futures and urban life, mobility as a service, and also the future of mobility infrastructures, as you will discover along the program. And in the day-to-day work of the chair, we also have the pleasure to have associated partners, industrial partners from EDF, Mrs. Sylvie Dozou, who is here today. And until recently, we also had Edgar Kay from Nokia Bell Labs to complement the team. And so you had the topics, and it's very important to us to address the challenges related to sustainability across these topics. And that's what we are trying to address, and we will show some results. And that's why we chose this title for this colloquium. So just a quick overview of how our research is structured in several tasks, with a common background on urban mobility, a task on urban life and scenarios and urban mobility on mobility futures, a task on mobility as a service and on infrastructures. And this is the examples of questions we are asking and trying to address in the chair, trying to connect a bit all these important topics about future travel experiences, mobility as a service, maybe crossing infrastructures, addressing the usage of public space, for instance. Important development goals, which is important for research and teaching. So we are trying to develop a vision of future mobility. Of course, trying to keep in mind the fact that we have to reduce the greenhouse gases emission, but also basically improve the quality of life of citizens. And that's why we're trying to reflect about these sustainability issues across all our tasks. And we have 2 specific deliverables that are dedicated to this topic. So now here is our team of doctoral students. So 3 of them we have here in the room. Charles Gall, who is working on mobility futures. So up-to-date building future mobility for and with the inhabitants of a territory. That's not the final title, but basically we are looking for a human-centered scenario-based design approach. We have also Tarek Chouaki, who works on reinforcement learning related to mobility on demand services by simulation. And we have also Mariana Reyes, who works on mobility as a service related to the concepts of governance and business models. Just a few words on our previous colloquium, which took place online, envisioning sustainable futures for urban mobility. So that was a few months ago. And we had about 100 people online. It was a very nice opening event, let's say, for our works. So that's the report, and you can find our also our results on this link. We are also producing a booklet of deliverables because for all tasks we are delivering some deliverables. 15 of them are planned until the end of the chair next year, and we already have delivered 10 of them to our partners. So that's an example of this booklet. And just a little insights on the workshops we are conducting with the partners. The last one was in April. So we had a workshop led by Tarek and Tiak on simulation and development of future scenarios for our local ground of experiment here, Communauté d'agglomération Paris-Saclay. And we also addressed the question of mobility as a service ecosystem here locally at Communauté d'agglo Paris-Saclay for the PhD of Mariana, focused on the creation of sustainable value. And now let's move to our other activities and collaboration with the extended team of the chair and the work with the Future Cities Lab. So for that, I let you introduce. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Flo. So I will now a little bit talk about the activities that we call leverage of the chair, that we were able to develop in the last years to get some additional funding for supporting further works that are related to to the research we do within the chair. So we have several doctoral students that work with us. Two of them are present here, and the third one is present online. So it's Yusu, who is working on dial-a-ride problems with electric vehicles. So it's actually on the operations of mobility on demand. With that, Ben Lima, she's at Central Casablanca, and she's working on data analysis for urban mobility with a special focus on accessibility. And then we have Julien Balthazar, who works on an eco-design method for electric mobility, being more interested in, I would say, rural and longer distance mobility. So going beyond our scope that we have in general in the chair that is very much focused on urban situations. And then we have also the link with the Future Cities Lab that is co-founded by the Région Île-de-France and also by the city of Beijing, and where we had a postdoctoral researcher, Adam Abdin, who was working on the interaction between automated mobility on demand and the electric power grid, and especially on how these vehicles could help to make the power grid more resilient when failures occur, for example. So we are still continuing to work with Adam, who is now a maître de conférence, assistant professor at the LGI at Centrale Supélec, and we are still continuing also to supervise a master student who work on research projects with us, and there are several papers currently being written together with Adam. And then we also have Michele Tirico, who joined us in January this year as a postdoc researcher working on the morphogenesis of urban mobility networks and how this, especially with new modes, can that's more in for developing the future of mobility. So we will see almost all of them today except Adam, but all the others will be presenting their current results. So also within this collaboration with the Future Cities Lab, we organized an online started in 2021, where we had approximately 12 presentations every year. We always start at 10 in the morning because of the time lag, the Chinese colleagues can also participate. We made some reports of these seminars that are available online, and we plan to continue this academic year, potentially starting beginning of October, but we did not finalize the agenda yet. So here you can see more information on the research topics. I already told you about them on the slides before. So is this now back to you, Flor?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So now
You can go.
Okay.
You can go.
So here I give you so after this presentation of the interaction with other labs and the extended team of the chair, we can talk a little bit about our publications. So in 2021, we published one journal article, which doesn't seem a lot, but the reason is that we had several articles accepted, but their official publication date is now in 2020. So that's why we already have 5 journal publications in 2022. We did 10 presentations at international conferences. And here you see also the cycle of PhD students, because first the students will go to present at conferences, and then they will get their articles in journals also accepted. We also wrote book chapters. And we also have some technical publication. And this year we had a little bit less conference participations, and now we see the journal publications stepping up. So maybe now I will give over to you.
Thank you. So a rapid glance at the agenda of our colloquium, and just to introduce you to the characters, the French-Moroccan family, Selma, Frédéric, and their son Mathieu. And we also have a retired farmer, Alain. So we are going to hear from them along the day. This morning, we are going try to address from on the topic of spatial accessibility to healthcare facilities with a case study in Casablanca. So that's for 2 hours with a more open scope on urban mobility transitions. How might we move tomorrow? So we will try to bring some contributions to this question, starting with Jacques with his PhD work, framework applied to perspectives, together with Jacob and with the moderation of Yann Briand, who is here from IRT Systemics. And we will introduce Yann this afternoon, but I will have the pleasure to work on the team management in team with Yann. And finally, some closing remarks, and we will make sure to finish sharp on time, because we have some technical constraints here on site, and coffee and more informal exchanges if you are willing to. So thank you. Okay, so Julien, if you would like to. Okay.
So thanks, Jacob and the floor for this first presentation. I am Julien Balthazar, and I will propose some insight from a territorial perspective about the ways environment is included in mobility decision making. So to start with, I'd like to present an overview of the French mobility. So for this, I have here a graph with the average distance traveled per capita and per year in France. And we see that car and planes represent most of the kilometers traveled by people, about 65% and 20% of the kilometers. So it's quite a lot. Another problem is that mobility is significantly increasing since a few decades. In particular, between 2008 and 2018, we had a 12% mobility increase if we talk about distance traveled per capita, as before. And this increase of the mobility is mainly caused by the increase of long distance mobility. The issue with this is that passenger mobility is therefore a major source of pollutant emissions. Here we have the contribution of the transport sector in the territorial French emissions, and we see that the mobility of the passenger car mobility is about the eighth of the CO2 emissions, whereas it's about a sixth of the nitrogen oxide emissions. There are also other issues about environment and the transport sector. For example, the question of the energy supply. In the European Union in 2018 imported 96% of its crude oil, so it's quite an issue. And then also passenger vehicles are a significant source of noise and land use. So the question we will deal with is the following: how can we reduce these environmental impacts? Of course, there are different solutions that can be complementary. We have, for example, modal shifting. For example, replacing trips done by plane by train, for example. There are also sobriety in usages, so doing less trips or traveling slower, for example. There is, of course, increasing the transport efficiency. It can be vehicle optimization or service optimization, or the increase of the occupancy in public transport. And then we have the fact that we can change the energy sources of the transport sector. For example, the electrification of vehicles. So the idea is that the planning of these four strategies can be done by the mobility organizing authorities. That is, for example, the case of Paris-Saclay Public Institution, which is one of our partners. And the idea of the presentation is to understand how the environmental stakes are integrated into mobility decision-making, and to determine if there are ways to try to improve these considerations. So to answer this question, I performed the following method. I did an analysis of the French laws, a study of planning documents of mobility, a study of environmental assessment documents and experts reports. And I am also conducting right now some interviews of organizing authorities. So I'd like to start with the presentation of the organization of the territorial mobility. So this graph will try to give a picture of this. So first we have mobility service providers with users and companies that constitute a mobility system, which is composed of products and services. And then we have local actors like the Paris-Saclay institution that guide the providers and also define projects that will influence the mobility system. These local actors are either in France, the regions that are displayed here, or either the organizing authorities. The competencies of each local actor are quite different. The regions deal with mainly the transport services that have regional interests. They also define the regional transport infrastructure planning and the multimodality planning at the regional scale. And it also coordinates all the organizing authorities that are at the smaller scale. Here on this map, we have the local organizing authorities, so it's a way smaller scale than the regions. And the objective is to organize the local transport services, the local mobility plans, strategy, and then also the infrastructure at a smaller scale. So yeah, okay. Let's continue with the graph. So the regions and the organizing authorities define the strategy for the territory. For this strategy, they mostly define some strategic plan. For example, for the region, we have the plan of transport infrastructure. And for the organizing authorities, we have mobility plans. Mobility plans can in fact be different documents. It's quite complex. They are really strategic documents that are really long, and the process to do them are really long and complex. It's an easy procedure. And so depending on the size of the territory, we have different ways to do this kind of documents. So it's quite a complex planning strategy. So then I'll continue with, globally, we have the public authorities that can also do some mobility diagnosis to understand how the users use the mobility systems. Also, the public authorities define the national transport policy that will influence the whole mobility system that is here in the red square. And if this is really important, there are also all the plans that are not linked directly to mobility, which influence mobility strategies. This graph tries to give an insight of this complexity of these interactions between different things for a territory. Here we have in the three columns the land use planning, the mobility planning, and the environmental planning, and the rows depict the different scale of decision, national scales to the more communal scale. All the arrows in this graph show the links, the interactions between different plans, and it shows the complexity of mobility because it has to consider the interaction with the land use planning and the environmental questions. Mobility plans, for example, are linked to a territorial coherence program, but also to territorial climate, air, and energy plan. Okay. So then now I have finished the construction of this figure. And the idea now is to understand how environment is integrated to the decision making of these different three level of decision. So, in fact, there are different methods that are designed to the assessment of the strategies, the projects, and the mobility systems. We have at the most strategic level, the strategic environmental assessment. We have for the projects, the environmental impact assessment. And then there are also socio-economic evaluations and the assessment of particular products and services methods. So the idea is not here to give a clear definitions of each of the methods, but I will try to give the most important findings I had where I studied the environmental methods compared to the strategy, the projects, and the mobility system. So first, we have first issue is that the context is way more dynamic than compared to the mobility strategy plan. Currently, there are fast changes in mobility practices. Notably, currently we had some true changes considering the COVID crisis or the energy crisis. And in the other hand, we have regular, frequent governance changes in different regions. There can be new competence assignments considering the national laws. There can be the fusions of some intercommunalities that change the way mobility is planned. And there can be also new elections that will change the vision for mobility. So the problem is that mobility plans, on the other hand, are designed to last for about 5 to 10 years. So it does not really take into account the fact that there is some dynamic changes. They are in fact rapidly outdated and they do not adapt to the new issue that would appear considering the crisis or the governance changes. The other issue is that considering the governance changes, is that there can be really fast some divergence in interests, no consensus. This way, mobility plans are not really applied. There are no, they can have no real impact on the mobility because the people that design them will not be the one that will apply them in the territorial data. The third point is that new laws gave authorities more stakes to deal with recently, but there are some difficulties to integrate them into their decision-making process. And there is also some issues because they find that there is a paradox between, in one hand, the environmental objectives. For example, the fact that we should not artificialize the soils, or the fact that we should reach carbon neutrality. And in the other hand, we have some development objectives considering demographic growth or economic growth. So it's hard to find an equilibrium between these two objectives. The fourth point is that mobility plans have, in fact, limited impact. Although it's useful for consultation and to summarize the current local initiatives, actions and projects that are made by the organizing authorities, there is a problem because the documents and the measures it should take are really constraining. For example, there is no budget clearly defined, there is no quantitative objectives, there is no sanctions, for example, when the emission zones are not respected. So yeah, there is a lack of efficiency of the plan. The fifth finding is the fact that even if we said that the long distance mobility was about 46 of the kilometers traveled by French inhabitants, there is a problem because in fact this long distance mobility is not considered in the mobility plan or regional plan. So it's quite an issue because there is no strategy to deal with the impact of the 46% of the kilometers. So considering these findings, I try to propose to some governance changes or methodological changes to deal with these different stakes. To start with, I will go with the governance proposals. So for example, currently the scope of the different plans are not clearly defined. They can have the same objectives, and so they are not really efficient. So in one hand, we should give environmental plans a more strategic and prescriptive role, where sectoral short and long-term objectives should be clearly defined. So it's not the case every time nowadays, but it should be more frequent. For example, in the case of the bicycle urban agglomeration, we have in the environmental plan a clear vision of how the population, the distance traveled by inhabitants, the consumption and the emissions should evaluate through the years from 2015 to 2050. So if we give the environmental plan a more strategic role, on the other hand, we should give the mobility plan a more tactical view. I suggest that there should be a clear description of the actions that are taken, and most importantly, it's not the case actually currently, is that there should be an estimation of the effect of the actions considering the environmental objectives of the environmental plan, and there should be also a clear timeline and a protocol to the corrective actions if the objectives are not met. Considering long-distance mobility, I think there should be a rework of regional infrastructure planning because they do not really are not used to define clear long-distance mobility strategy. So it should be used to do some diagnosis, some planning, and some monitoring of long-distance mobility. So on the other hand, we talked about governance changes. There are also some methodological changes that should be done. The first one is that currently an environmental assessment must be performed for each plan which is presented in the following diagram. So it is the same draft than before. We have the three columns and different plans. So it makes for territories 9 plans that have to be assessed by an environmental method. So it's quite an heavy procedure. It's an heavy process. It's really time consuming and resource consuming. So I suggest that we should go towards a unique process for environmental assessment at the scale of a region and at the scale of the organizing authorities, and that's all. So it should be a simpler way to conduct these assessments, and it should be more efficient. On the other way, diagnosis objectives, policies only considered most of the time only tank to wheels impacts. So it's about the exhaust emissions of the vehicles. And it's quite an issue because here we have a complete life cycle of a vehicle. Nowadays, the policy only considered the emissions and the impacts linked to the energy conversion of the vehicle, but it does not consider, not always, but sometimes, the impacts caused by energy supply. And it does not also consider the life cycle impacts of the equipment. So the vehicle impacts linked to its material supply, its manufacturing, its end of life are not considered. So the evaluation scope of the policies should be extended to include the whole life cycle of vehicles. The last proposals for the methodology considering environmental assessments are the following, and it's perhaps probably the objective of my thesis is to create a tool for territorial mobility linked with life cycle assessment to estimate the environmental consequences of different planning and project options. And another idea is to propose a method for territorial for organizing authorities to arbitrate between different stakes that can be at short or longer term effects. Okay. So to end this presentation, I will do some summary of what I have presented. The environmental impacts of the transport sector are quite significant, in particular considering the greenhouse gas emission or the nitrogen oxide emissions, but also land use or material consumptions. We didn't really talk about it, but it's also really material consuming. There are different levels to make mobility more sustainable, but there are actually currently some barriers on some governance issues that make it not really fully effective to deal with this. So in this presentation, I propose some idea to tackle the different issues I presented. And it suggested notably to better consider long-distance mobility planning, to redefine the aim of the numerous planning documents. There are more than 15 planning documents, so it's quite a lot. And to design a common environmental assessment method for plan and projects. So I thank you for your attention, and I will listen to questions if you have some.
Questions? Yeah. Are there any questions online or no? Or yeah, I will repeat, but then go. Yeah.
Yes, I'd like to know what do you plan in the next steps of your work? Do you plan to work on some planification tool that will help to aggregate all these challenges, meaning to plan future mobility services or infrastructure that will combine the offer and demand needs, but also the further environmental and financial impacts of this project?
Okay, maybe I repeat for the audience. And I forgot to say just earlier, enjoy the colloquium. Sorry for that. So I'll do that now. And to repeat the questions from the audience, the questions is for the next steps. Do you plan, do you intend to have to develop a planification tool that would aggregate let's say, how could I summarize that? Demand and offer perspectives, and also try to integrate the mobility services with a different kind of performances. What do you think today?
Okay.
End of your first year, go.
Yeah. So it's not really really clear for now, but I think that the idea is to do the following things. Okay. So the idea would be probably to get from a territorial perimeter an evaluation considering life cycle assessment that will, in the one end, do some diagnosis of the mobility. So based on the different, I'll say this, based on the data we have on the territory. My objective would not to collect the data, but to use them and to transform them into environmental problems. And in the other end, when we have the diagnosis, we have also we could do with this tool different tests for strategic perspectives to evaluate, to assess, yes, the orientations of the plans, but also to test the project options that could be done on the organizing authority perimeter. So that's a bit the idea, to test, for example, if we want to create a new road for different transportation modes, we could have a quicker idea of the impacts it would cause, considering the creation of the road, but also modal shifting and this kind of thing. Okay. Does it answer the question?
Yeah. I think there's a great opportunity to discuss this aspect, considering the context, mainly the increase of the cost of energy, and also the strategic intention from the states and number of local authorities to enhance the share of public transport and rail modes. And so it's a good opportunity to shuffle the way, this is your approach, to rethink the strategic approach.
Yeah, and considering the interviews I did with the organizing authorities, often most of the organizing authorities say that they do not really have easy tool to apply to have some environmental data considering their projects and plans. So the idea is to try to provide that to them. So that's the idea.
Yeah, thank you, Jan, for the question. And I think that it would be good for you to discuss a bit more on this subject. Any other? Yeah.
From EDF. You suggest to use a life cycle assessment in order to evaluate the environmental impact of different plants. What are currently the different methods used with the current?
Yes, so
just rephrasing the question, what are currently the question from EDF, Maxime Top, would like to know what are the different methods to integrate environmental assessment to plans currently.
So indeed, in considering LCA, life cycle assessment, we have different alternatives that can be used for impact assessment. In my case, there are few alternatives for some variations of this method that I could apply. First, there are the territorial LCA that has some usefulness considering my scope, because I do not study one system or one service. I study the impacts at the scale of a region. So this kind of methodology has some sense. And then there are also prospective LCA, prospective assessment, that is useful because when we consider strategic decisions, it's useful to include to the assessment not the impact that a mode has nowadays, but the impact that we might have in some years, perhaps in the decade, to have some correct design of the mobility strategy. There is also a third possibility that could be used, is the use of consequential LCA, because it's quite useful for decision making, because it's the idea of consequential LCA is not to assess the impact of how can I say it simply, the impact of a product or system or a company or a region. It deals about assessing the impacts of the decision. It can be a policy decision. And for this, the idea is to model the consequence of the effect of the decision that we are assessing. And we assess then the environmental consequences of each element of the decision chain. I don't know if it's really clear, but the idea is to model the chain of the decision. What will the decision affect later? And then for each change that it will create, the idea is to assess the consequences considering the environmental impacts. So this is the three things that I could use in my my future tool to do some environmental assessment. There is a lot of literature about this methods, but consequential LCA is not always. Yes, there is no consensus about this method, so it's a bit still in the research.
More recent development.
Yes, research development of the research. Yes.
But Sylvie Douzot, EDF also. But as of yet, you haven't made a choice. You are just now at the stage where you look at life cycle assessment, if I understand well.
Yes, yes. Nothing is decided yet, but it's in discussion. But
in progress.
In progress. Yes.
Yes.
Thank you, Julien. You said that there are first changes in regulatory practices like COVID-19. So are you able to detail a bit what are these changes? Because I think there can be a bit contradictory between making more telework and more personal car maybe due to COVID and more transportation due to the energy crisis. And are there really long-term tendencies? And is it really easy to imagine what would be the future of it?
So the question is, what are the changes really about and in the mobility practices, and are there some contradictions? And is it long-term? Is it going to be long-term changes? Yes. That's from also Crisel Central Superior.
So it's quite difficult yet to have insight about the long-term consequences of energy crisis or COVID crisis, but I had some explanations from the organizing authorities that because I conduct the interviews. The COVID crisis, for example, changed clearly the use of public transportation, public transport. The use of public transport decreased by 10%. Is the data of the last month compared to before the crisis. So it's quite a lot. There are also yes, the consequence of home working. I don't know. Home working, yes. Because, for example, in Aix-Marseille Provence metropolis, there is less demand for the public transport during the day, but so it's a bit changing the offer. And on the other hand, there is more demand in the evening. So everything is changing. There is different things that is changing, and it's hard to adapt the system so fast because it's not really easy to do. Then there are also changes about the use of bike, of car sharing, but it's hard to know if it will last. In fact, but many of the things that appeared during the COVID crisis has been quite reinforced by the energy crisis. So
We have the question online in case there's no.
Yeah.
Can you see it there, or shall I read it down?
No, we don't see it.
So from Nathalie Projet, long distance is an interregional issue. At which scale do you think the long distance mobility planning should be better considered?
It's a really good question. I don't really have the answer, but I think the region scale could be interesting because it already has the competence considering the multimodality infrastructure at a larger scale than the local mobility. So because they have already some competence and that it will be only small changes to include long distance mobility strategy in their planning, I think region division scale would be quite convenient. National scale would also be a solution, but it's not really the dynamic that we see in the law because there is more decentralization of the power. So perhaps it would be more the regional scale. Local organizing authorities try sometimes to include long distance problematics in their planning and projects, but it's quite difficult for them because they do not really have this overall view of the mobility, but for tourism or for the use of the airports or other big infrastructure, they try to understand how they should improve the solutions to connect to this hub and other things, but it's only local consideration of long distance mobility. Thanks for your question. I hope it answered.
Okay.
Question. Also from the Anthropolis chair. That doesn't work. If you could go to the slide in the beginning where you showed all the different actors and the different scales, which I find super interesting before as well, but you see all the different the levels, the local, the regional, and so on, the national. On the one side, I was wondering if, or up to what degree you looked at the international level, and also in how and what level you looked at the power dynamics, because just because your hierarchy doesn't always mean that the one higher is, I think Paris is quite a good example for that. So you have sometimes very different power dynamics between the different actors.
Interesting, yes. I didn't really study the international problematics because even though in the case of the European Union, we have some really strong directives that will influence the mobility, for example, considering electrification, considering pollutant limitations, emissions of vehicles and other things. Even considering the governance, that's the directive of the European Union, but we must have some strategic environmental assessment for the plan. So there are many things that are decided at the scale of the European Union, but I did not see through it exactly precisely what's in there. Then for the question, considering the clear interaction between the organizing authorities, the regions, and the government, yes, of course, it's quite simplified here. And the relations between them is not always really clearly defined, but operational strategies is always defined by the local actors. The governments mostly define the laws considering the vehicles, the technological issues, and they define the governance for the local actors, but they do not influence the way systems are used. They also define the content of all the environmental assessments. In fact, all these methods are clearly defined by the government. For for example, in the strategic environmental assessment, there is always a diagnosis, the formulation of some orientations, different options, different scenarios for the assessment. And then it also make it compulsory to have a monitoring process for the plan. So we defined many things for the strategies and the projects, but they do not really are part of the operational act. Yes. Okay.
Thank you. And maybe one second question also related to the assessment. The government is defining the rules, how it has to be conducted and so on, but who is in the end conducting it? So in case it would be changed, would be certain people affected by that changes, or their interest groups which are?
Yes, in fact, it depends. Not always the same groups, the same actors that in fact design the strategy, the plans, or the assessment documents. It can be most of the time is different actors that work together to create these documents. But it can be yes, some private actors. It can be directly the organizing authorities that make it. But it's not there is not a clear institution that always do that. Sometimes we have some research institutions that can help also this process, or some, for example, the CEREMA also often help the organizing authorities to create these documents, but it's not always the same actors. For the monitoring, most of the time, there can be an observatoire, an institution that is that has to evaluate the consequences of the plan and the projects. But in reality, it's not. There is no really strong yes, monitoring of the plans. There can be assessments, but they are really not really frequent. But it's not really. There is no harmonized methods to do the monitoring.
It means that if the tool which you might work on would be targeted at the primarily mobility authorities, but also possibly other users, or
I don't know if I can really answer to the question yet. So it's soon perhaps, but why not? Perhaps.
Thank you. We still have time for questions. We are very early.
Yeah, we started early, so yeah. But we can run a bit early
and have a longer
You
break.
can speak longer.
No, we can have a longer break. It will be good.
Okay. So
Thank you, Julien.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And now I will give a speech on how can we make mobility infrastructures more sustainable. So this is, I'm going to present a joint work. So it is a team of authors from the chair, Sylvie, Edgar, Jacob, Mariana, and myself. We produced 2 deliverables on socio-technical modeling of mobility infrastructures, and also the exploration of sustainability conditions. So that's a bit the summary of our findings. And to introduce you this topic, so we have Selma, Frédéric, and Mathieu, who are in the Massy Palaiseau hub, which is nearby. You might know it. And they are really wondering how they, we are wondering how are they sharing the public space with a lot of travelers, maybe cyclists, buses, very crowded. So a lot of questions about public space we're going to address here. So define urban mobility infrastructures first, and explore the idea of this usage of public space and mediating time and space, the sustainability conditions, and some illustrations to make this practical. Oh, I'm missing some words, sorry. Okay, so this is related to the fourth task I presented earlier on mobility infrastructures. And so what we did, we tried to have this socio-technical modeling of infrastructures and examine what are the sustainability challenges. And in the future, we are also going to have a look at how to share infrastructure, sharing models, and planning networks and design for that. So that's more specifically related to sustainable development goals 9 and 11 on towns and cities. So just a few words of introduction. What we wanted to do is, in our multidisciplinary team, is to unify the various concepts in this idea of contemporary urban mobility infrastructures. And we did that from different standpoints, from urban planning, sociology, transportation domain, and computer science. And this is really in rapid evolution. And it was very difficult at first to know how to define these mobility infrastructures. So we give you some insights on that. And we try to understand how different mobility usages appear to compete in the public space. And lastly, what are the levers to make mobility infrastructures more sustainable and hopefully go beyond the reduction of greenhouse gases emissions, which is quite a lot, but we will try to investigate other levers. And a very simple question to start with: are vehicles part of the mobility infrastructure? That's where we started with. We had a lot of debate. So who thinks vehicles are part of it? The chair team here. I don't know online, but we didn't plan a vote. So basically, you don't think vehicles are part of the infrastructure. Well, we'll see. Okay, so how to define that? So small examples from different kind of infrastructures we are going to talk about. Okay, so the first outcome of our work, in fact, combining urban planning and also transportation, it is about urban infrastructures, and it's really in basically 3 layers. Not only the technical part. Most of the time we tend to consider infrastructure is just maybe a road, maybe a race, maybe a cycling path. So that's the more technical part, right? But we consider this part here, technical part, is connected to the habits of people, of groups. It's related to society, and it's also bridging some kind of relationship between society and the regional or the territories in spatial dynamics, right? So this is how we viewed in the end the infrastructure with this technical part related to other kind of states. I'm not going to go through all this literature work, but this is to say we had a look at a lot of different authors who pinpoint different very important elements about urban infrastructures and also applicable to mobility. So you will find back this idea of dynamic interactions with the local context, the fact that it's also technical, of course, and here it's a window to explore relationships between cities, humans, technologies, and ecology. So that's really summarized in the previous slide. So to sum up this first stage of our work, we considered that infrastructures are incorporated, of course, technological dimension, but also a sociocultural dimension, and is also related to a history and a culture of a city, a region, or a country, which doesn't mean we're going to study in-depth culture, because we are not, some of us are sociologists, but we are not all of them sociologists, but we are aware that these are connected. Okay, so from social sciences, an important model is from the model of social practices, which interlinked material competencies of people for mobility in this case, and also the meaning of all that. And so the technical components of mobility infrastructures can be really included into this material dimension here. And the idea of this model is to say that these three elements co-evolve and are in dynamics. And this is illustrated for driving an electric vehicle, which can be explored thanks to this model from social practices. But we also have models from computer sciences, and that was also the results of our collaboration with our partners as for the previous one. So it can be also seen in 4 layers, but this time inspired by this model of open system interconnections. So I'm not going to go into very much detail, but you will see the technical part here at the bottom. But here for this computer science viewpoint, which is important, is to say that we also have a digital infrastructure, of course. We need a coordination, and we have a lot of elements for operational management, for policies, etc. So that's another view for our urban mobility infrastructure, integrating or more focused on this digital management part. So next steps is an investigation on the notion of public space, which is really related to mobility infrastructure, and this idea of a link between time and space. That's mobility. What is mobility about? Linking time and space. So we have this first reflection, or based on some authors, on speed and slowness in towns or in cities. So what we figured out is that, in fact, the existence of infrastructures can modify our relationship to speed. So, for instance, the speed bumps could, in a way, slow down speed, which is not really nicely phrased, but you can get the meaning of that, or just accelerate the feeling of slowness. So all this environment in fact, can have some dynamic dimension between speed and slowness in town. So here is the idea or the example of a foot passenger. And further, we pushed the idea of a kind of elasticity between speed and slowness through 3 examples. For example, in city, we could say the pedestrian, the pedestrian is really slow, but if the cyclist goes faster and the vehicle goes even faster. But in case of traffic, in case of many things, then it can be all reversed because this one is stuck in the traffic jams and this one goes a bit faster and the cyclist is going in front of everyone. So we can have this kind of elasticity in the and changes, dynamic changes in cities. Okay, and next we also identified related to this idea of speed, and you know that it's fairly easy to grasp as an idea that we have different speeds between somebody is cycling and the bus, different speeds, maybe some risks, and maybe this is creating the infrastructure is indeed creating, in some cases, some friction zones, because if everybody is mixing on a road, then you can have some friction zones between the pedestrian, the cycling infrastructure, and the vehicle infrastructure, and some kind of different friction zone can be delimited, can be identified here. Okay. So that can be very interesting and helpful to analyze the safety issues which can derive from that. So for this role, infrastructures mediate time and space through the idea of speed, and also about digitalization, difficult to say, the digital aspects of the social link. So this is related to really the digital practice of mobility. Nowadays, it really fosters this notion of being everywhere, at every minute. So what is called ubiquity, yeah. And we have this trend around these infrastructures on what is called individualistic nomadism, right? So this is really related to all this potential we have to move and to do many things on the move thanks to digital objects or tools. And once again, this practice of mobility is related to time, and time is seen as a resource in this dense urban environment. Now, we had a second part of exploration on sustainability conditions for this urban mobility infrastructures. So our idea is to have a look and to take a look at this object in the context, of course, Julien mentioned it, of the national low carbon strategy. So what are the relevant elements of infrastructure we are going to look at? What is the appropriate, or what are the different levels of technology to address the challenges, and how to manage this interface between mobility, energy, and also digital infrastructures. So to do that, we had a first workshop, internal workshop within our team. And we tried to have a first look into what we could call, into brackets, low-tech infrastructures and more high-tech or more technologically, with a more important technological content for infrastructures. So this would lead to this kind of examples. We are going to develop a bit more later. And then what we did is conduct a kind of literature review on based on eco-design sources, sustainable mobility assessment sources, and also resilience management, to try to have a look at the different insights, which are, of course, this is very interrelated. That's very typical of sustainable development and impacts in general. So we made a proposition of some guidelines, some topics to look at to ensure the sustainability of our mobility infrastructures. So, of course, does it allow to limit carbon emissions, but not only? And of course, there are some connections. Does it allow high usage intensity? Is it prone to lead to a shift of behavior of users towards more sustainable mobility? But also this question of equal access or creating socially responsible employment, for instance, which are more on the social part of the sustainability. Some elements on the articulation of soils and land use we had also earlier with Julien. And but also the question of safety of users associated with friction zones, and the preservation of biodiversity, restoration of ecosystems. That's more on resilience management side. Is the infrastructure resilient to the occurrence of extreme events? Because we are expecting quite a few now. And are we able to limit the infrastructure investments? So that's more on the economic side. So it doesn't mean that this is it, or maybe it can be rephrased in other way, but we try to cover as many insights as possible to try to challenge the sustainability of our object. And here, small note, this is of course related to the zero artificialisation net or no net land take. You can have a reference here. So some illustrations on what we had a look at, not all of them, but yeah, a number of examples. I will show some illustrations on some of them. More specifically on the interaction between power grid and shared autonomous vehicles. Also on infrastructures enabling active modes as investigated by Mariana. And this idea of curb management, I don't know if you heard of that, and the notion of bookable zones. But also there are examples of road and vehicle management systems, of shared roads, for shared roads and streets, the light emitting signaling system, dynamic geofencing, for example, solar roads, and at a smaller scale, solar road systems and low carbon asphalt mix. So here we have the work conducted in the Future Cities Lab, trying to investigate how power grid and shared autonomous vehicles can be connected. And this is leading to the work on resilience assessment, which is closely related to what I just mentioned before, and also techno-economic analysis of that, of the potential of shared autonomous vehicles to provide power grid services. And I think the latest study or paper was about connecting to an hospital. Was that right? Yeah. So I will not say much more on that, but it's under investigation in the Future Cities Lab. What about enabling active modes? And in this case, walking and also cycling. Interest beneficial for public health, for lowering carbon emission. In broader sense, is good for mobility justice. And we will see that it's often, in fact, underestimated in mass applications, but there are also risks for safety. So this has to be investigated further. And here, a little illustration of walkability context by Mariana, where we could see the difference in walkability, or currently how the zone is walked. So defining several areas between walked but walkable, etc. Another example of tool related to infrastructures enabling active modes for walking. Interesting to have a look at the open data tool to map the sidewalks. Here, it was developed in context of COVID to detail the width of city streets, and it's available here on La Fabrique des Mobilités. Curb management, what is that? In fact, you probably noticed that there are more and more people, services operating in the streets or installed in the streets. And the curb manager, what is that? Is an operator who is supposed to match in real time a curb offer with needs. So what is the curb? The curb, it's just this part, but in fact, when you say curb management, it's this part, it's the sidewalk part. The extended curb is what it's about here, is so. So when you got, this means that in streets, it can be, the cities can have revenues from operating this public space. So a big question mark, is it sustainable or not? It depends on the conditions, I guess. And what we realize is that the street and the curbs, it's a rare resource in the city in terms of space. It's, you know, people are fighting for this space, and you can hear some news about, well, who is able to or authorized to park in this area or not. And it also requires a renewed governance and the relationship with local authorities to give the priority to certain users for the curb. So that's another example of a curb management platform which can support this kind of this kind of service. So first, conclusions and recommendations in the idea to head towards sustainable infrastructures, to work with diverse lenses on infrastructures, also equity in access, the management of friction zones, but not only the very obvious aspects. The fact that pedestrian infrastructures are not sufficiently considered in the systems most of the time. Work with the technological integration and the just sufficient options, and work on the connection and interfacing between systems of infrastructures, meaning that connecting mobility, energy supply, and digital systems. And of course, in the context of crisis, energy, but not only, how to envision the future of these infrastructures is a very important question. So that could be another track of trying to connect these two tasks by exploring future scenarios for mobility and urban infrastructures. That's how we could reach all this. Thank you. References. Okay. Any questions?
Do you envisage to consider the roadworks when talking about the curb management? Because, for instance, here in the or even I'm living in Lyon, it's the same thing as the same at least in the French cities. You have regular and most of the time quite unplanned, at least for the user, roadworks, and it could be really impacting for the daily mobility. So I don't know, it's very dynamic.
Right.
It will impair the mobility for mostly a few months, hopefully, for the users. So it could it be part of this curb management approach?
Yeah. So the question once again about curb management, could the idea of roadworks that be integrated as a dynamic aspects of infrastructures be integrated into this curb management system? I don't know if it's currently done, but it's certainly very relevant. But the difficulty, as you said, is it's highly dynamic, it changes, and you can see it here on the plateau from one day to another. You can take one road and the day after, then you're stuck. And it's just the same for buses. This morning, the bus was stuck because of the metro work. It had to go backwards, etc. So it's very dynamically changing. But then it's really relevant, and also for pedestrians in these changing areas, building very quickly. So I don't know if it's taken into account right now. I don't know all the literature about this subject, but I think it's really blooming. It's quite fresh area for let's say operations and also research. But it's certainly very relevant to consider that for the good or better share of public space.
I think it's a bit like transport information some years ago, because these roadworks, some people are aware. You as a citizen, it's popping up every morning, but these guys have authorization, so it's not coming out from nowhere. So there's a missing connection perhaps between the supervision of authorities of these roadworks and then the end user on the sidewalk that discovered a new home every
That's very true. Very true. Thank you, Jan.
Perhaps we may figure out if we consider that resource will become very scarce, rare, including public spaces uses, and if you put that into relation with a relationship with the multiplication of end users with, between active modes and public transport and classical modes and autonomous vehicle, we can imagine that a solution will be to develop multiple use and ephemeral, kind of dynamic
towards more ephemeral
and multiple parallel uses and dynamic according to the time of the day, the time.
That's the idea, that it could be flexible according the time of the day.
More flexible, which might involve also conflict of users.
Yeah, but there is probably a limit to that because it has to be doable.
And the question between that is a question of governance also. Of public space. Which model?
Yeah, which mode has got the priorities? Is it the most vulnerable one or not, or is it the Yeah, it has. Yeah.
You need to have some reliable infrastructure if you like to park your bike in front of your apartment. It shouldn't change every 2 months because otherwise you will stop using your bike.
That's very true.
And also this other topic about electric vehicles and the need for further charging infrastructure that will impact this curve infrastructure. So taking into consideration.
Yeah, I didn't develop this part, but we had a bit of insights on this charging infrastructures in cities, but also outside on highways, etc. Yeah, it's really diverse. It implies be connected to the energy supply, and this is not taken for granted, of course.
So do you have the answer now? Is a car or part of the infrastructure?
We had this debate, and from our team, we eventually said, yes, it's part of it. Even if it's moving, the infrastructure is not only the still part, but it's also the moving part. But sometimes we slip a bit. But yes, for us, at least, is that right? Just tell me if I'm betraying the...
I think it's important to incorporate that.
Yeah.
And especially between with the perspective of new autonomous vehicle,
yeah, exactly,
mode of mobility. If you do not integrate this part as part of the infrastructure,
exactly,
you miss something.
So we've got this kind of extended view of infrastructure within the chair.
I think also cars are very interesting, or any kind of mobility is an interesting part because it can be infrastructure in a different sense. It can be battery storage and so on.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
And that I think is also an interesting place with the hospital and so on. So as soon as it becomes part of several infrastructures at once, more or less. And small comment on the audio. So if somebody speaks at the back, please speak as loud as you can. Otherwise, you have to repeat also the comments. Yeah. But I think if we speak here in the front loud enough, then it's okay.
it shows the complexity of making a global infrastructure more sustainable.
Oh yeah, it's very complicated. And we can have some very local intervention, but does it make the whole lot really sustainable? Is quite an issue. Yeah.
This was one of my questions as well. Is it now part of it or not? And why? But I think like we had a lot of discussions on the curve and the terminology and so on. And when I was looking at the image, I was wondering, is the curve not like the curve is this little thing?
Yeah, it's a little.
But then on the other side, it's also the other side. Because it's also about the people who are stopping there and parking. So now the arrow points into one direction, but I think it's even if it's a small thing, it's everything what happens on both sides of it, more or less.
It's curved. It's more sidewalk.
But more than the sidewalk, it's even the place where you can park, for example, or even the second row parking in some cases.
C'est la bordure de trottoir. Hein. Bordure de trottoir.
Do you want to go back to the slide? Because it's a super interesting discussion I think we had, because it's even the difference between American and British English. So either it's sidewalk or it's American word.
No,
but it has been found a quite clear definition as only this thing, but then curb management defines what happens on both sides of it. So it's a term which... No. Yes, you have sidewalk. You have sidewalk management and you have curb management, which sometimes is used interchangeably, but.
Oui, donc c'est de la gestion de bordure de trottoir. I couldn't find it.
It's more the bordure de rue, en fait.
Oui, bordure de rue.
Not the trottoir, because it's the...
Parce que les Américains, depuis très très longtemps, gèrent ça avec la ligne jaune. C'est interdit de se garer, et les lignes rouges à nos pompiers. Et pour ça, plus important, en fait. Et je pense, on parle de cette gestion de la... C'est pas vraiment la bordure, c'est le fait de pouvoir s'arrêter ou pas, d'avoir des endroits spécifiques réservés. Et tu gardes sur la bordure rouge, tu restes 15 secondes.
Okay.
C'est de l'éphémère.
C'est ça, c'est à l'américaine.
And one other question.
Yeah.
If you go to the first slide on the one of the first slides on the with all the different levels, the different speeds, there was this S-shaped diagram.
This one.
Where would you situate public transport infrastructure, for example? Because it's somehow in between the different ones, and in some cases it's completely separate because it's metro, for example, but in other cases in the tram or something, it's on the street, so it's interacting with the speeds as well.
Yeah, it's true. Here it was for this figure, of course, it was not. It's true. It was not included, and well, difficult because we try to make categories, but in fact it's overlapping, right? Because it's shared. So that's the difficulty of representing something that is shared because most of the time in Paris, the cyclists are moving on the same part as buses, not always, but sometimes. So I call up to my team, where would you?
I think
I call a friend.
We decided to exclude rail infrastructure in this diagram because in the analysis of the sharing of mobility in this particular case, because they have it has a particular space and it doesn't share it. There are fewer interactions with, for example, pedestrians or other types of infrastructure. It does exist, but in this case, we wanted to focus in the infrastructure and the collapsing practices. So that's why.
But in more detail, we could add this complexity, of course, because sometimes it's shared between.
Sometimes it is.
For trams, for example,
And in the analysis of speed, maybe also.
It's a bit. It's an attempt, let's say.
Also, the sharing of tramways and how it's done depends a lot on the city.
Yeah, exactly.
So, for example, in Paris, you almost have your own track all the time for the tramway. In a city like Zurich or Vienna, trams share just the same infrastructure with the cars, with the pedestrians, with pedestrian zones where you have trams passing.
Yeah, exactly.
Bahnhofstraße, for example, is the largest shopping street in the city, and there is like 4 tram lines in every direction going on the street, and no cars. And then there are streets with cars, and so
it's really depending on the local conditions. That's right, and maybe you are allowed to criticize this view. No problem.
It was no criticism, it was just a question where I think it's interesting which can go between the different levels. And
okay. So maybe, is that any other questions, or shall we go for the break? If it's okay. Okay, so we'll have a little break. Yeah, we will start again at 11:45 for our online audience. Thank you very much for attending this first part, and see you at 11:45. Laisse mettre
come in here for the premiere partie.
Hello, hello. Okay, so hello again. I am happy to be here. It's my pleasure to present to you the overview of the work I have the opportunity to carry out in the chair Anthropolis. My name is Mariana Reyes, and I am doing my PhD here at the chair. Now, I developed the topic of the appraisal of walking in mobility as a service. And we know that mobility as a service involves a whole ecosystem and involves integrating several modes into an easy proxy. However, we decided to focus on walking since we consider it is one key element, one key piece of the puzzle towards sustainable mobility, and in this case, towards sustainable mass. Is it here? Okay. So I would also like to start by telling you the story of Alan. And this is part, we wanted to show and to transmit how our research translates into everyday situations. So we chose to present you this family and this personas as a way to exemplify this. So Alan, just as a quick reminder, is a 76-year-old, very active man that lives in the outer suburbs of the capital region of Paris. And he, even though he's very active, he has some health issues. So specifically, he has a leg problem. Now, he has to go to Paris to get a checkup at the hospital, right? Now, he already has some sustainable practices, mobility practices, and he chooses to carpool with a neighbor. The neighbor works in Paris, brings him to Paris. But once Alan is in Paris, he needs to find his way around to find the hospital, right? Now, Alan, since he is 76 years old, he cannot tolerate a lot of sunlight also. Now he needs to find a way where he can actually take breaks, where he can sit, where he can maybe drink something and get to the hospital safely, shaded if possible. Now, for Alan to reach this information, it would be necessary to have a system that shows this type of information. Sorry. Now, right now, Alan doesn't have the access to the information he would require to better choose his way around towards the hospital. Now, what we are proposing is that MAS is a tool that could bring this benefit to users. MAS has the potential to facilitate everyday activities to every user. It doesn't matter your physical condition or your age. And it would be like this, a tool towards sustainable mobility, but also towards inclusion and social justice. So our work definition of MAS, we define it as technological innovation and organizational innovation. So in these both ways, MAS improves mobility management and permits to go beyond what we can reach right now in terms of mobility management. Now, the objectives of MaaS aim to diminish the excessive use of the private car, and through this to also diminish pollution, congestion, and to better allocate public space. Now, all of this is done by integrating several mobility services into one-stop shop type of digital platform, and that we can access through our cell phones or through our computers. Now, the idea behind the integration of mobility services in MaaS is to help individuals make more sustainable choices and more informed choices towards better mobility practices. Now, this is achieved or would be achieved by simplifying access for users and by customizing this access according to the mobility needs of each user. Now, this requires a lot of work in the background, job of data collection, data treatment, data provision, and also in the organizational side, that requires a lot of work in partnerships and agreements between partners or stakeholders of the mobility service, and also out the mobility service system, sorry. Now, where does this proposal stand? Now, this stands in a context of uncertainty and climate emergency. So with harsh consequences on food, energy, and health crisis, as we know. Now, global temperatures that keep rising with inequalities, and this is all a shout for better sustainable mobility practices, but better practices globally, but specifically mobility is really pressed to make changes quickly. Sorry, so we believe that MaaS is a tool to enhance these objectives and sustainable policies through through the improvement of access to information that could give the opportunity to users to, as I mentioned before, make more informed choices towards this model shift away of private car or excessive use of private car. Now, this ideally would all have an impact and positive outcomes very related to also to spatial justice. So why focusing on mobility as a service? On walking in mobility as a service. We know that active modes such as walking are very affordable modes that require energy from humans to function. So they have also the potential to connect the last mile of journeys and to help reach public health and environmental goals. Now, this would also bring positive social, economic, and environmental outcomes that could be enhanced through more visibility already of the mode in this type of innovation, such as MaaS. And also, this means we need to improve users' interface and the overall user experience in this type of solutions. Now, we have to take into account that walking, it is not a service like the rest of the services that are already present in mobility as a service. So we have ride hailing, we have taxi, we have other e-kick scooter services, public transport even. Walking is not a service already, so it requires different focus and a special attention. So we focus on this brick in the mobility system, and we tackle the need to focus on certain gaps and barriers that we have already identified. This not us, but globally, they have been identified, such as the lack of continuous routes, the quality of urban space, of sidewalks, and also there are some incentives at the scale of cities or territories that could promote more walking. We know this, it's urban form, and this has a direct impact on this. Just as a side note, the Institut Paris-Région, they recently worked on a new index of walkability of the region, and it's going to be available very soon. So the last one, it's from 2017, 18, I think, but there will be a new one in the upcoming weeks. So that will be something interesting to look at. So our specific research problem is the integration and the innovation around walking in mobility as a service. So it remains underdeveloped and undervalued in the ecosystem of, to begin with, mass actors, but also when it comes to the technological part of innovation. Now, what is required to enable this? We found that there are 4 main axes we can act on to better appraise walking in mass. The first one is to identify the elements in pedestrian mobility that can be improved. This means socio-technical elements that come as the base of the mobility system through this mode. Second, it's the governance dynamics in mobility as a service. That means the way that actors interact and value and prioritize certain modes over others. So we want to identify the levers we can find in this ecosystem of actors. Third, we want to see what the policy implications of this are. That means that in order to, we say that walking in mass brings, or is supposed to bring, many sustainable outcomes or many positive outcomes throughout multi-sectorial policies. That means this will be, potentially bring outcomes on health. This involves certain actors on climate, on mobility. So we need to take into account all this in order to create a change. And fourth, we also need to focus on what the effects will be in the futures of mobility and in the futures of mass. So starting with number 1, what are the processes that can be improved? We focus on the digitalization of information and regarding the state of infrastructure, like sidewalks, benches, lightning signals, and to include or complete databases with relevant cartographic elements and infrastructural information that facilitates mobility for users. And also, this is whether people are doing full walking trips or in intermodal trips. That means the short connections in between modes, public transport, biking and walking, for example. And finally, mass also offers the potential of crowdsourcing the feedback that could also help to improve the information that the same users receive. So there is the potential to get the information from users and to make it more dynamic and updated. Also, if we take into account the potential of IRT systemics, for example, and the research being carried here, there is an opportunity space of exploring how artificial intelligence can qualify the public space and the infrastructure and provide this information directly through this type of tools for mass. So we seek to identify the role of different mass governance dynamics and stakeholders interactions, as I mentioned, and within the mass ecosystem, and what they represent as levers for sustainable mass. So specifically as levers for the inclusion of walking in mobility as a service. So according to these authors, the mass ecosystem usually comprises mass operators, transport operators, cities, transport authorities, data providers, ICT, payment system providers, etc. And these authors also agreed on the major role that public authorities play at different territorial scales to achieve their policy objectives through these types of tools. So this is something interesting when it comes to walking, because the competencies are quite clear, but at the same time scattered when it comes to some of the territories. So who is in charge to defend the right to mobility of pedestrian mobility? This is the instance that should take place in the actorial ecosystem to appraise walking in mass, for example. Now, according to the European Metropolitan Transportation Authorities Association, we need to create a citizen-centric mobility system that enables this informed mobility choices. And this is what I showed you before in the scheme. So here with the example of Alan, he's at the center of all of these ecosystem of actors. Now, we intend to analyze and identify the levers of each one of these actors, and there are more, this is quite synthetic, towards or face to the integration of walking. That means how the public transport authority would evaluate or measure that the integration of walking would benefit them, right? And the same applies for every single actor. So that is our goal, to identify these levers. This is an example of the OECD's recommendations on policy coherence for sustainable development. This goes on the third axe I mentioned before. That means there is the realization of which multi-sectorial policies are involved in this improvement. Now, we can influence several mechanisms through this action. And this is also a work we will need to carry by identifying which sectors and which policies and the strategy maybe to make a transversal collaboration in order to achieve this implementation through policy. And regarding this, the fourth axe of the assessing of potential impacts in the futures of mobility and futures of mass, we are also carrying out works that aim to identify the implication that the integration of walking in mass may have in the futures of mobility through scenario assessment. And this is part of the work we are doing in collaboration with researchers of the Dalarna University and KTH Rodel Institute of Technology in Sweden, where we are doing scenario analysis in order to see what are the main uncertainties that are going to impact the development of mass and the development of certain changes in mass, such as walking, for example. This is a work in process, and I will be happy to share more of this in a further maybe colloquium or seminar. And to conclude my presentation, I want to share that we have three main objectives: to improve and prioritize information for walking trips and walking connections in the itineraries offered to users to provide a better access to opportunities and to the territory itself through the improvement of information and availability of information, but also the quality of information. And how to do this? This can be done and is already in process, but I think the user experience and the user interfaces are still have still a lot to work on or to improve. in order to help us reach these goals and these objectives. That means, for example, in our research, we saw how it's more the commercial private solutions that have actually invested more money because they have it and effort on developing tools to make pedestrian mobility easier or to improve pedestrian mobility through augmented reality or others. Nevertheless, we can wonder that, I mean, it is the role of public authorities too to provide better mobility for everyone, not just road or not just rail. And this is where this type of research, I think, at least gives voice and gives room to this reflection and to say, hey, we need to look at this too. And I think that's it for me. So thank you so much. I receive questions. Yes, Jack.
What was the question? Like, you know that I like it very much, and I think it's something which is very much under analyzed or underlooked. And well, there's of course the bike part, which is a different conversation, which is also very challenging. But I think just the pedestrian part is already very hard. But pedestrians are also very diverse. So on some of your photos, you showed, for example, people in wheelchairs. You have people who are faster and slower. When I take the German railway services, I always say that I'm very slow because it increases the chances of getting the connection train. So how do you think these kind of differences in user profiles or in requirements can be integrated in math, and how can they even help people? I know that RTP, for example, has, I think, the option of accessibility, but how could that be thought further?
So thank you for your question. That allows me also to tell you a bit more on what can be done or what is done already. So in the couple of solutions we explored already and analyzed, there is the possibility to choose in between I'm a good walker or I'm a normal walker. This is a good start. However, what constitutes a good walker or what constitutes a normal walker? As you mentioned, there are a whole lot of profiles that cannot be integrated into good or normal, right? So I think there is a gap, and the potential of these type of digital tools on providing customization options is not taken until the last, I don't know how to say it, but it's not pushed until what they could do. So that's one thing. I think we need to, and this is a challenge too, because providing the customization for different profiles of pedestrians or travelers is one thing, but keeping it simple enough for you to be able to not open a whole dashboard of parameters without getting crazy. It's going to be a work on the design of the interfaces and the design of the information chain. So yeah, so far, for example, also Citymapper allows you to say, I want to go to the main streets, or I want to use the secondary streets when you don't mind that much about time. There are several other solutions that we explore in our benchmark that remain quite isolated because they are not navigation solutions. It's like solutions or applications that allow you to measure how much you walk, and if you walk more or less, you have some rewards. So these are isolated tools that could be integrated to a mass. Why not, right? So maybe even the territories have an interest in doing so, because you can actually explore what are the commerces that are in your way, or what are the services that you can actually visit or pay. Or so there's a lot of interesting things that can be done, and yeah, so a challenge to integrate both all of these profiles.
I guess perhaps one extra question on this last topic you mentioned, the specific aspect of the incentive and financial incentives supporting the the development of walking. Do you plan to assess that, for instance, against financial impacts also in terms of health and other specialists in this aspect? But you know what I mean? Getting health points if you walk more, and this eventually at the end of the day, this has a cost for the society that you need to invest on the travelers so that they walk more on a daily basis. You can get rewarded later on.
Yes, exactly. Even insurance. Oof. So,
financial incentives.
so Jan asked about the if we are going to work also in the development of incentives or economic incentives that could have a role in developing walking, right? And also the benefits that this incentives or that this improvement of walking could bring to other sectors. So we are not going to work in the mechanism of incentives because our perspective is from the production and the governance perspective. So we're working with the actor ecosystems. But it is part of our research, the identification of these benefits for the health sector and for the insurance sector, for example. Those are the two that I can think of right now. And there are many studies, like again, isolated studies in the literature review we've carried out. You can find a lot on the benefits of walking through digital applications, but on the medical sector only. And this should be really connected or more transverse to mobility, right? To the mobility sector. So yeah, I tried to answer your question there.
Maybe I missed it, but what is your main proposal to enhance walking in the mass system?
To already identify how actors in the ecosystem, Renault or Île-de-France Mobilité, could have a benefit out of it, could have a positive outcome from integrating this. We don't know, actually, if the question has not been posed yet. So what is the interest actually? They're interested for these actors to have this better connection. That's one thing. And then another thing is to improve the information that's provided. That is the collection of data from infrastructure on the quality of the sidewalks, on which streets have trees, which are more shaded than others, which is louder, in which streets is better to walk or more nice to walk, because this is information that could have an impact on the choice you make, whether to go by bus, bike, walk, or just take the metro. If your streets or your paths are just not nice to cross, it's just as good as taking the metro. So maybe that could make a difference. That's the proposal. So identify the levers in the actors ecosystem and identify also how to or which are the channels to improve information through these actors, because each one of these actors provides a certain degree of information too. That's why they are in mass also. So.
A question online from Ulrika. Do data protection rules play any role in your research?
Yes, I think as in all of our research, but not more than in others. I don't have a really.
Maybe from the application part, for example, where you, if you would show how fast you're walking in order to feed information, share the location and so on. And
this is also already a sensitive topic. I think there are some known polemic cases of some fines received to some mobility providers because they have not been in accordance to the RGPD. So it is it has been mentioned in our conversations how to also reward the user, because he's a part of the ecosystem, and he or she also produces information that after it's going to be a part of the system, of the mass system. Now, I think, and we think, that there has to be an analysis on what goes back to the user after all the data it has produced. After, usually is through the improvement of the service, or that's at least one of the conversations we had with public transport authorities or collectivité territoriale. That's like, well, the data you give as a user, it comes back to you as a service, right? So yes, but how are we gonna measure that or look at that in this type of tools? And that's, yeah, also to be taken into account. Because yeah, as a user, it's you who are building this corpus of data, right? And more if we are talking about crowdsourcing. So that's why, as Jan mentioned, I think the incentives and the incentive mechanisms and strategies are a whole topic by itself that has to be connected with what we are doing. But it's another perspective too. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Back online now.
Now we will have a presentation from Widat, who is online. Can you hear us, Widat? And
yes, I can hear you.
You share your screen, please.
Sure.
Okay. Okay, we can see your screen, but we cannot hear you yet.
Yes, can you hear me?
Can you speak?
Yes, can you hear me?
It's fine. It's on our side, so we'll work on it. The microphone is good.
Okay, can you try to speak now?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you very well, and we can see your screen.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm very pleased and happy to give the presentation in front of you and to be part of this colloquium. My name is Widat.
Widat, we are seeing your presenter mode and not your.
Okay,
this one is good.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, you can try to be a little bit louder so everyone can hear you.
Okay.
Okay.
Is it good now?
Yeah, the display is good. And is everyone able to hear?
Thank you. So, good morning again. I am very happy to be part of this colloquium. My name is Widat, and I am a PhD candidate at Centrale Supélec. I'm also based in Centrale Casablanca in the Complex System and Interactions Laboratory. And my presentation of today is titled Casablanca Multimodal Balanced Floating Catchment Area for measuring spatial accessibility to healthcare facilities. In this presentation, I will try to answer questions such as how is it easy for people in Al Bayda area to access primary health care facilities? And Al Bayda area is Casablanca city and its surrounding districts. The second question is how does people's adoption of different transportation modes affect spatial accessibility to public hospitals? Before going further, I would like to give you a few points regarding spatial accessibility. Accessibility in general is a measurement that helps us to know how easy is it for people to enter any kind of urban facilities and or any kind of opportunities. For example, schools, healthcare facilities, hospitals, workplaces, etc. And the spatial accessibility is based on four main components. The transport components, in which we take into account the effort of one to travel from point A to point B. The individual components, in which we take into considerations the socioeconomic segregations of people and the needs of any one of people who are living in a study area. The land use components, which tackles spatial distributions of opportunities within our study area again, and finally the temporal components that considers the available time for each one of the opportunities. So in the literature, it was recommended to take into consideration most of the four main components of accessibility. Then again, in the literature, we found four main approaches to compute accessibility. The utility-based approach or family of measures, which sees accessibility or spatial accessibility as the economic gain that people have after accessing any kind of opportunities. The person-based measures which takes into account the opportunities people can get access with predetermined time, and people who were interested in this family of measures or in this approach used what we call the time prisms, the spatial time prisms, in which they were able to see what kind of opportunities people have access to within a predetermined time. The infrastructure-based measures assess accessibility from a point of view of travel time, congestion, average travel speed, etc. Meaning they measure spatial accessibility from performance metrics like distance or travel time, for example. And finally, the location-based measures that compute accessibility within spatially distributed opportunities. And one of the more developed family of measures based on the location-based approach is what we call the floating catchment area family of metrics. And the first index of this family was what we call the two-step floating catchment area. And it was called so because we can compute spatial accessibility using this metric in exactly two steps. The first step is to calculate a ratio. For example, if we take the example of hospitals as an opportunities, and we are interested to know the spatial accessibility in places where people are living, the first step is to calculate the capacity per people who are floating in the catchment area of each one of the hospitals. For example, for this hospital, we are going to measure the capacity as the number of hospitals beds or the number of doctors who are working here per the number of people who are floating in the catchment area. We are going to do the same thing for the second hospitals and so on and so forth. In the second step, we are going to go to each one of the places and sum the ratios we calculated in the first step. And this one gonna be the results of spatial accessibility. For example, for people who are living here, their spatial accessibility is the ratio of this one hospital because it was the only one who has been floated in their catchment area. For people who are living in the second place, their spatial accessibility is the sum of the two ratios of the two hospitals that have been floating in their catchment area. And in the third place where people are living, their accessibility is none because no hospital has been floating in their catchment area. However, the first metrics have a lot of limitations, especially the failure to consider differences within the same catchment area, meaning that people who are living in all the area from a point of view of this metrics have the same accessibility, which is not the case. And so we had some more indexes in the same families, which try to overcome many drawbacks of the first metric. For example, the enhanced two-step floating catchment area, which divides the catchment area into many zones and gives different decay function for each one of these zones. The kernel two-step density, two-step floating catchment area is exactly the same thing as the enhanced, except that it used continuous distance decay functions and many more indexes which try, as I said, to overcome difficulties and the drawbacks of the first ones. But however, the most developed metrics of all the floating catchment area metrics is what we call the balanced floating catchment area. However, this metrics does not consider more than one transport mode. And the second drawback that we found is that the catchment size amongst all population and facilities were uniform. And therefore, we suggest to have a new matrix that we call the Casablanca multimodal balanced floating catchment area, in which we were able to use more than one modes within this matrix and to have different catchment size to do our calculations. We applied the metrics that we developed into the context of North African metropolises of Casablanca city and its surrounding districts. And Casablanca is the most populated area in Morocco with about 4.2 million inhabitants. And in the last decades, this area has experienced growths and expansions of its geographical extent, making it a very interesting study case for our accessibility computation. And following this growth, new transportation forms have emerged, especially the tramways and the replacement of the buses company in the study area. In Casablanca, we still have low car ownership compared to European cities, Paris, for example, but it's already growing and already making some congestion problems. Other problems that we can see in Casablanca is a pollution, for example, and some accessibility issues. Now I will give a brief description of the process we followed in order to compute the metrics I described before. The first part was the data collection, and we were interested to have the road networks, and we did so by downloading it from the OpenStreetMap. The data set regarding public hospitals was extracted from a public data set of Moroccan health sites, and it was enriched by the informations and reports from the Moroccan Ministry of Health. Population data set density was extracted from the World Pop data set. And lastly, transit or public transportation data was extracted from OpenStreetMap and the official websites of the public transport companies in Morocco, mainly Casa Tramway and Casa Bus. And these informations were basically stops and lines, locations, frequencies of travels or of trips, and the travel time between two successive stop pairs. Then we had, in order to continue our process, we had to make the transit information or data in the correct form, or the standardize it in order to be able to calculate, for example, the cost matrix. So to do so, we had to create GTFS files, which are few files that describes how transit company work basically. And to do so, we took the stops information, stop location, the frequency of trips, and travel durations between the two successive stops that we were able to get, in order to create files such as like stop text files, stop time files, trips, agency information, etc. Then once we got the GTFS files and the road network data that we got from the OpenStreetMap, we use an OpenTrip planner to create a graph. And once we did so, we were already able to see some or to experience some trips within the study area. But we were interested more in creating the cost matrix in terms or based on the travel time. I mean, the travel time from each one of the centric points of the population and the hospital's location. To do so, we used a script, an open script that we found, and we used the graph that we created in order to get the cost matrix. And our methodology were based on different catchment size determinations, because each one of the hospitals has to have a different catchment size and therefore different catchment area, because each one of the hospitals has different capacity, different ability to attract people, depending on its type, mainly in Morocco in general and in Casablanca in particular. Same thing was done for people catchment size determination. We were able to have different catchment size for each one of the centric points for the population using this algorithm. Then we based our weight calculation on a Gaussian function because it was the most adapted to describe the distance decay in terms of travel time for our case study. And we normalized the different weights, and we had to be sure that it meets that they meet the properties described by the balanced floating catchment area, the initial one in the floating catchment area family of metrics. And doing so, we were able to calculate. The spatial accessibility at each one of the population's location using either car or transit. The K is the mode. For example, if we want to calculate accessibility in centroid number 1 for people who have cars or who are using cars, that would be A1 car. And we will use each one of the weights we calculated and the number of people that we know in each one of the places and that are using each one of the different transportation modes. And these are the outcomes, which are basically spatial accessibility maps in our study area, and they show the spatial patterns of and the spatial distributions of accessibility, which are interpreted as the number of hospitals bed in our study area per 1,000 people. So as you can see here, we have relatively better accessibility within the city center mainly, and the difference and the car accessibility show pretty much the same patterns as the transit accessibility. But to know the and transit accessibility results. Yes.
We lost you for 30 seconds approximately. There was a problem in the network, so we didn't hear your last 3 sentences.
Okay, should I go back? Maybe here or before?
Yes.
Okay, so here I said that here are basically the results, which are spatial accessibility maps that show spatial patterns and spatial distributions per each one of the modes. And as you can see here, we have like a relatively good accessibility within the city center of Casablanca, and the car accessibility shows the same patterns as the transit, but we were interested to know exactly the difference between or the contrast between the two modes in terms of spatial accessibility. So we plot the normalized contrast between the results and we aggregate them per district to know the districts in which people who have car or who are using car are more advantageous to access public hospitals compared to those who are using public transportation, and vice versa. The last analysis that we were able to do is the map that shows correlation between the population and accessibility results. And this one is very interesting because doing so, we were able to know places in which population is high and accessibility is low, and therefore the places in which authorities need to intervene as soon as possible. For example, in these places, in these ones. So the work I presented today present the calculation of spatial accessibility to public hospitals by two modes of transportation, which are cars and public transportation in Casablanca, using a new matrix that we call the Casablanca Multimodal Balanced Floating Catchment Area. And this one takes into account the capacity of each one of the hospitals and therefore the congestion around capacity among people. And our results show spatial patterns of potential access to public hospitals in Al Bayda area. Thank you for your attention.
Move here for the questions.
Yes, thank you for the interesting presentation. So my question is about the time dimension. So the accessibility data that you showed, are they measured at a certain distance or are they like averaged over the entire day or in a certain time slot? And related to this question, do you take into account the congestion that changes over the day, or just travel times are under ideal condition of the congestion? And finally, do you take into account, maybe yes, but I'm not sure, the competition between a certain amount of people competing for the same places at the hospital, let's say? Is it accounted into the accessibility measures?
Okay. I'm not sure if I was able to hear the first part of the question. I heard the congestion part.
It was about time. What time was considered for your approach, and the second part was what was
about
it?
congestion.
About if congestion was taken into account in a period of the day, I guess.
Okay, like for the time, we did the cost calculation in terms of travel time, of course, for people who were able to go at 10 p.m. like for the to start their journey from their home to public hospitals at 10 a.m. And did we take into consideration congestion? The answer is no, but like we would be able to, for example, to generate multiple metrics for multiple parts of the day, and this will be based on the GTFS files and will show the difference between results depending on the difference between frequencies of trips that public transportation offer, but will have no influence on the car accessibility, because car accessibility or car travel time using car was fixed because it doesn't take into account congestion within the network.
Okay, so maybe it's a bit optimistic then for the car part.
And even for the public transportation, because it does not take
yeah,
into account congestion, even for public transportation.
I would have one question, and that's on you talked a little bit about public hospitals, private hospitals, and also a bit the question of spatial inequality or spatial injustice between people with more or areas with more car access but less public transport access. So would there be a possibility, for example, to extend it into a way that you somehow link the private car owners rather to private hospitals and the public transport users more to public hospitals, if there is such kind of dynamic in the use of hospitals?
Yes, could you repeat the question for me?
Okay.
I can also. Or was it the question, or was it my volume?
What was it? The volume?
The volume, please. Yeah.
Okay, right. So Jack is asking about the possible correlation between, I try to get it right, between public hospital and public transport, or private hospitals to private cars. Yeah, is that basically right?
You can, would be a way to extend it to include private hospitals with a stronger weight towards the private car users.
Yeah, okay. Can you include weights on hospitals depending on the users?
In fact, the weights related to public hospitals that we took into consideration were based on what we call the base population for each one of the hospitals, meaning that each one of the hospitals in Casablanca, depending on its type, has a base population, meaning a number of people that this hospitals is willing to accept. For example, if we're talking about small hospitals, that would be like 20,000 people, and so on and so forth. But did we think to consider public hospitals for people who are using transit and private hospitals for people who are using cars? It is interesting to consider, but the thing is that we don't know any information about private hospitals' capacity, and it was interesting for us to consider more public hospitals, because these are the hospitals that are accessible in terms of affordable, that are affordable for everyone in the study area.
Thank you. I know you're struggling a lot with the access to data, and that's quite challenging environment to get detailed information on a lot of things. I'm just wondering, it's probably not a very successful attempt, but would it be possible to ask the public hospitals to provide anonymized data on where the people actually come from, which go to that hospital, to somehow validate the approach behind it?
This is a very interesting question, because at some point of this study, we try to get access to such kind of data, like where are people coming from for each one of the public hospitals in our study area. Like we were not able to so far to get those informations, but again, from a methodological perspective, spatial accessibility determine the potential accessibility for anyone who want to get from where he lives to any to a public hospitals, meaning that like potentially what is the potential access of this place to public hospitals, independently of is there anyone who is interested at the moment to go there, or yeah.
Okay, so you don't really need this kind of data from hospitals, if I get it right.
I mean, for the location-based or sorry, for the location-based or spatial accessibility using this specific approach, we don't really need it. But we can. This one could be could be interesting if we want to include the individual components to our accessibility results, because when we if we get, for example, the data for people who are who went to different public hospitals from where they live, and we know, for example, for which reason they went there, and for how many days they stayed there, etc. We would able to know how different people with different socioeconomic characteristics are able to have access to different public hospitals. This one would be more about adding the individual components to our results than having the results of how many hospitals bed do we have by thousands people.
Okay, thank you very much, Widad. Do we have more questions for Widad before the lunch break? Oh, not in the room. I don't know if there are anything not in the chat. Okay. So thank you very much, Widad, for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Remotely, but thank you for the very interesting presentation.
Thank you.
Beaucoup à toi pour cette présentation. Bon appétit à tout le monde. So we'll have lunch break and we will be back in an hour time. 13:45. 13h45. Nous serons de retour. Merci beaucoup.
Yes, and please use the second link that we have sent for the afternoon session and not the same one as for this morning, just to remind you.
Merci Tarek for the reminder. Merci beaucoup. Je suis assurée pour le tout petit